Good morning. I'm Hazel Henderson, and I'm very grateful and honored for the opportunity to be with you at this historic occasion in the Belvedere Palace, talking about going beyond economics and to a more systems view of managing socio-economies. And I want to thank Minister Barbara Labuda and all of your excellencies who have helped put this historic meeting together, and I want to congratulate you. So to begin, we might have a little bit of a chuckle at this cover from The Economist, which comes from London, and even they are realizing that the old economics is failing. So let's look at what is really wrong with the old gross national product view of the world. And of course, many of you know that the GNP model leaves out an enormous amount. It just manages it and quantifies the cash flow in the economy. It considers women's work as unproductive, so much unpaid work that women do. 50% really of all of the productive work in any society is done by women. All that is ignored in gross national product, and unless it's paid for. The GNP sets the value of the environment at zero, the value of healthy children at zero. And of course, it shortchanges our cultures, our local communities, and creates, because of this, in tremendous social costs, and steers our economy in the wrong direction. And of course, we're all dealing with this now every day. The unemployment, the poverty, the pollution, and the loss of local autonomy and local cultures. And of course, it's all made worse by the globalization of this very narrow model of economic efficiency. So today we have this corporate-driven globalization, the privatization of markets, and very little accounting of all of these social and environmental costs. And of course, this is why the World Trade Organization ends up with so many battles on its hands, where it overrides national sovereignty and local rules, because it was these same economists that made all of those trade rules at the WTO. And so what we really have in the world now is we still have this economic view where the economists really are talking about, they tell the politicians who are trying to get elected, we will keep unemployment down, and we'll keep inflation down, and we'll keep deficits down, and we'll keep interest rates down. And so many of the voters say, well, we don't really think that you can keep all of those four barometers of economic distress down at the same time. And of course, this is true. You know, you push one down and the others get worse. And, you know, if you try to run at full employment, you have to worry about inflation, and central bankers are always riding this roller coaster. And that, of course, is because the world economy is a very complex system, and it involves lots of feedback and variables, and that kind of model of a global sort of interacting of all of these variables is very well understood by biologists and systems thinkers and ecologists, but it gets economists very confused. So what we are trying to do here together is to expand the framework for human policy. And really, ecology is the limiting system. You know, there's only one planet that we're living on, and we have to learn to use these resources wisely and share them better. And so living systems theory and chaos models of very dynamic systems are more appropriate than those old economic models that thought everything was in equilibrium and that supply and demand would bring everything back to normal. Well, of course, today we know that there isn't any normal to come back to, that the whole planet is in a process now of very rapid change and transition. And so what I like to look at is the three different sort of modes of resource use in national development. And the resources that all humans use are information, matter, and energy. And information is what drives the way we use matter and energy, whether we use them efficiently or inefficiently. And so information depends on the society's cultural DNA, that whole body of goals, values, education levels, all of that social capital and human capital that manages the matter and the energy in that society. And so the more we increase education levels and understanding of how the world really works, the more efficiently we use land and minerals and air and water, and the more efficient our agriculture is and our energy use. And similarly, we need to look very carefully now at what kind of energy use is most environmentally benign and also that gives local areas the most autonomy. And of course the most environmentally damaging is probably nuclear energy, where in the United States here we're now having to think of trucking all of these high-level nuclear wastes all over the country at the same time that we're talking more about national security since the terrorist attacks. So the most benign forms of energy, of course, are nature's energy, solar energy, wind power, renewables, and the new technologies like fuel cells, which very soon are going to replace internal combustion engines in our automobiles. And so the shape of things to come, if we look back in history, we see that human beings began by using solid fuels, wood, coal, and then they developed more liquid like petroleum and gaseous fuels. And where we are now is in a kind of a transition from petroleum and coal to gas, and natural gas is going to be kind of the transition fuel on the way to the solar age, where we will base our energy systems on hydrogen. And I'm pretty sure that your children and mine will be driving cars where hydrogen is the fuel source and a fuel cell is the engine, and the only thing that will come out of the tailpipe is pure drinkable water. So this is an enormous transition, and not surprisingly, economists are about 10, 15 years behind, and those old textbooks that are still teaching economics students in my country and yours and all over Europe really have to be updated. So I like to think of a total productive system of a society as a three-layer cake with icing. And the icing on the top, of course, is the private sector, and that's where innovation comes from. That's where small businesses develop. And a friend of mine had been working there in Warsaw for some years on microfundus. And her name is Rosalind Copisaro, and some of you may know her, and she's been doing a lot of good microcredit work there in Warsaw and other parts of Poland. The next layer down is the public sector. And you cannot have a private sector without a public sector where you have schools and universities and roads and airports paid for by taxpayers. And then those two top layers are in the economist model, but they miss out on the two lower layers of the cake, as many of you, of course, know, and I've also written about many of my friends who are there at your meeting. And the lower layers of the cake include the love economy, which is all of that unpaid work done by women and done by people in traditional communities that don't use money. And in many societies, that's still about 60% of everything that's going on versus about 40% of what's actually recorded in the official statistics of GNP. And then the lowest layer of the cake is Mother Nature. And if Mother Nature's productivity is compromised or cannibalized by the cash economy, then that shows up in inflation, because we then have to spend a lot of money cleaning up and making those systems viable again. So women are absolutely integral to the new economics, and I wanted to share with you some news from an organization which I'm a life member of here in the United States, and it's called the Center for Women's Business Research, and it's run by the National Association of Women Business Owners. And the new numbers about women-owned businesses in the United States, as of 2002, there are 6.2 million majority-owned, privately held, women-owned businesses. And these companies employ nearly 9.2 million American workers, up 30% from 1997. And this is a growth rate that is 1.5 times the national average. And so women-owned firms now generate $1.15 trillion in 2002 in our economy, up by 40% from 1997. So this is a very exciting story, and I'm sure exactly the same thing is going on there in Poland, because women are very pragmatic and they're starting businesses now on their kitchen tables using computers, selling their goods over the internet, and it's very, very exciting. And so what the old male economists failed to notice when they developed the old GNP model is that there is a whole repertoire of human behavior. And it goes all the way from conflict and competition through cooperation and sharing. But the problem is that market economics is extremely patriarchal, and they focus almost exclusively on competition, and they don't notice the caring, sharing other half of the economy, which kind of buttresses the competitive half. Now, economics is the only social discipline that doesn't notice this, because if you look at game theory, psychology, sociology, anthropology, information and decision theory, systems theory, all of those disciplines take the whole repertoire of human behavior as their base, all the way from competition and conflict to cooperation and sharing. So this is the balanced view that women are bringing back into the economy and economics today. And so let's go back to something pretty fundamental. And that is, if we go back in history, we remember that really there are two main ways that human beings have transacted with each other over the millennia. And one has been the pure barter exchange that took place in all the marketplaces, and still does in many places, where people bring a pig and exchange it for other agricultural products or whatever. And those barter markets, of course, economists were right to say that they were pretty inefficient, because it's not very inefficient, you know, to have to carry a pig to the market and all of this. And so, as you know, money came into the whole equation many thousands of years ago as a token, a way of just exchanging the tokens rather than having to carry the goods about. But what's happened today is that money-based economic systems have kind of colonized the whole planet, all the way to the World Bank and the IMF. And the old trading systems, the barter systems, the traditional non-cash-based systems, are really the ones left out. There are really 2 billion people on this planet who still trade in very much the old way and have to live on less than $2 cash per day. And this doesn't make them poor, because they're brilliant, resourceful people, and they develop local livelihoods around using local resources. But economists call them poor and try to suck them into the cash economy. And I have no problem with that. If people want to use microcredit and they get further and further into the villages with these kind of loans, that's great. But we have to remember that the macro money economy is spinning out of control. And today we have $1.5 trillion worth of these currency transactions sloshing around the planet, 90% of it's speculation, and even my friend George Soros will say that this system is spinning out of control. So this is why we had crises in Asia and the terrible things that have been going on in Argentina, a very rich country with resourceful, well-educated people. The money system is so badly designed that today we must redevelop the barter system. And as luck would have it, it now can be electronic. And so if you think eBay and exchanging goods and services over the internet, what is happening now is that barter systems are becoming super efficient from global to local. And at the moment I'm involved in developing a barter software system called manyone.net, and you can go on the web and take a look at it. This will enable enterprises, entrepreneurs to sign up and put their barter for offer up on these barter menus so that they can make a trade in their local village, or they can find out what goods are bringing in the marketplace in the local towns, and then they can decide, well, I don't need to take my produce into the local town because I can make a more efficient barter deal right here in my village. So all of this is being rethought, and it takes us back to the time when money systems went haywire. And in this country, after the Great Depression in the 1930s, you may remember reading that all of our banks closed, and everybody was sitting around with 25% unemployment saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, there's no money. And so what inventive communities did all over the United States was they created local money. And I've got a whole book of all of these photographs of this kind of local money, and here's one which shows some of the local money in New York. And some of this local money was printed by unemployment committees, and it's sort of, as long as people took it in exchange, the local markets could get cleared and needs and resources could get met. So that's another way that we're sort of going around the old malfunctioning money system of the IMF and the World Bank and Wall Street. And so at the same time, we're making a transition to what I call the age of light. And this is from that fossil fuel world that we all lived under for the past 100 years to now the emerging light wave technologies, photonics, fiber optic, lasers, holography, solar technologies, optical computers, biotechnologies, perhaps really the most Faustian level of human technology, which will require a tremendous amount of wisdom for us to use it in accordance with the highest values for all people. So not surprisingly, our economies are very rapidly restructuring. And what we see in the United States and in Europe is there's the old obsolescent sector, which is the fossil fuels, the heavy polluting kind of industries, and the planned obsolescence and the nuclear power, giving way to what I call the emerging sectors. And these are the sustainable, clean, green, low energy use sectors based on renewable resources. Now you can see this transition, this global transition going on at 7 system levels. There's the level of the global population in the biosphere, And then there's the level of international agreements and between governments, like, for example, the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. The third is nation states, where they're changing their domestic policies and they're beginning to go beyond GNP models toward quality of life and sustainability models of running their economy. And then you have the global markets and all of these global corporations that are still operating on the old model, along with global finance, which has turned into a huge bubble. And global finance is really about 9 times larger than the actual economy on the ground that it's supposed to track and keep score of. And this is why you have these financial meltdowns and bubbles here and there. And then the fifth level is the global civic societies and cultures, where people are beginning to become globalists. And this is a very exciting thing, where all the people got together in Seattle and in London and in Prague and Genoa, really saying, hey, we have to change this recipe for how we do economic development, and another world is really possible. And I totally agree with them. And it will be a world where men and women will take equal share of responsibility in all decision making in the public and private sector. And another new phenomenon is what I call the new attention economy. And as these information economies shift to services, time and attention are becoming just as valuable as money. And in my country, 28% of American adults, in a survey that was done recently, said that they'd stopped the rat race job and the efforts to try and make more money in the urban centers, and they were moving to rural areas where the community was quiet and still cohesive, where the air and water were clean, where they could participate in local government, where their children could walk to school, and they were reducing their cash income in exchange for this quality of life that they like better. And so we see this happening. That's what's happening now in all of the so-called industrial countries, is the change with the changing composition of GNP from goods, you can drop on your foot, and high energy and all of this, to services. And this is where women come in, because women are the best at the services economy. And another thing that's happening internationally is what I call playing the global standards game, where increasingly there are voluntary partnerships between companies, government agencies, and civic groups who represent the users, and they're doing public-private partnerships in local communities to meet the real needs that are unmet by all of this macroeconomic, too far away sort of system we have today. So they can deal with drug addiction, and they can deal with unemployment and local crime in a much more direct way. And then another thing is that companies now are working to create global standards and worldwide practices, and I've been very involved in this activity through my work with the Calvert Group that I'll mention in closing. And one of the global activities that's going on now is global accounting protocols in the post-Enron economy, where the protocol for accounting for sustainability will be now measuring company performance on both economic, social, and environmental grounds. So those three companies will be judged on all three of those kind of performance basis, not just economic and, quote, economic efficiency. So I have been working with the Calvert Group of socially responsible mutual funds here in Washington, D.C. For really since 1982, and Calvert is now my partner in a new set of quality of life indicators, and I do hope those books have arrived there in the Belvedere Palace so that you can look at them. And our indicators look at 12 aspects of quality of life, including, of course, employment, how much energy to make a unit of economic output, environment, health, human rights, of course, income, infrastructure, national security, public safety, recreation, very important new services industry all over the world, shelter, how many people are homeless, education. So all of these aspects are part of quality of life as we are moving our economies forward. And we cannot use only economic units. I mean, you can't measure human rights in terms of dollars. You can't measure environment in terms of dollars. You want to look at parts per million of junk in the air or in the water. And so we have moved beyond economics to a systems approach to managing a society on these kind of quality of life indicators. So I hope that you'll give us some feedback and go to our website, which is www.calvert-henderson.com. And lastly, I'll just mention that I have introduced the Calvert Group to the UN Secretary General, who has, as you know, introduced this global compact that companies sign on 9 principles of corporate social responsibility. And our Calvert Group, we manage about $7 billion worth of mutual funds of companies that don't pollute the environment, are not manufacturing weapons, have a good record in terms of labor standards, and don't have disputes with indigenous peoples around the world. And yes, we do have a good performance with these portfolios too, just as good as anyone else on Wall Street. And so the Calvert Group is now donating its services to the Secretary General of the UN to do social and environmental audits, so that these companies who sign the UN Global Compact, we can see if they're really walking their talk. And so lastly, what we really need is to globalize an earth ethics that comes from the grassroots everywhere in the world and includes the caring and sharing economy that women know so well. And so I would recommend that you look on the web and take a look at the Earth Charter, which I have been a supporter of ever since Rio. And there are 16 principles of human responsibilities to each other, to our communities, to our countries, to other species, and to the planet. And I'm happy to say that the Calvert Group is the first corporation that has signed the Earth Charter, because its principles are very similar to those of the Earth Charter. So again, thank you so much for allowing me to address you in this way, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to visit your beautiful country, which I've never visited, and I was disappointed not to be able to come on this trip, but I hope you'll give me another opportunity. And so, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my grateful thanks, and have a wonderful conference.